Hey, Leilani with the Magical Solution here. So, I wanted to come on here and talk about a subject that I know has been just so overdone, and people have exhausted every possible angle of this subject, but I want to approach it from a meta modern perspective, if you don't mind. So, one of the common questions that I get from newcomers in this practice is, how do I set up the altar space, right? Now, of course, that is going to depend on the type of spiritism or espiritismo you practice, right? Because as we know in history, spiritism, before it came to the islands, did not have an altar. There was no altar, okay? But when we got to the islands and the syncretization happened, and we started to see more components being added to the altar for various reasons, that is when we start to see the differences amongst the different groups, okay? So the first question will always be, well, what type of espiritismo do you practice, right? And once they tell you, the answer will then go from there. Now, usually, as a safe measure, regardless of what you practice, a mentor, an elder, a godparent, or just simply an espiritista that has been practicing for a very long time will usually start off their students with a very basic setup, right? A surface with a clean surface, very clean surface, with a white tablecloth on it, a candle, a glass of water, and your prayers, right? Usually, very simple. But did you know? Remember how I said that Spiritism in Europe didn't have an altar? Well, I kind of fibbed a little bit, but not really. So, yes, they did not have an altar, but the Spiritism that started in Europe was heavily influenced by Christianity, okay? And so for them, there were sometimes components of a ritualized situation. And when I say ritualized, it's a very loose term, because there was no real ritual around this. But there was candles. Candles was a huge thing, and candles remain consistent. Candles were the first tool of the spiritist and the espiritista. Okay? Why? Because candles give light. And what are espiritistas? We are lighthouses. We are light for the spirits. We give light to the spirits. We elevate through light. So the candle has always been numero uno in terms of the tools that a spiritist would need to communicate with the dead and to work with the dead, right? Then when we get to the island, the second most common tool, which actually nowadays more so precedes the candle, is the fuente, the glass of water. Okay? Now it makes sense that when we get to the Caribbean, when we get to the islands, when we get to Latin America, the water is going to be a very important component. It makes sense. We're talking about islands. We're talking about masses of land that are surrounded by water, gods that are all having to do with water and rain and hurricanes and things like that. Water was a very important element for the practitioners of Spiritism in the islands. And so the Fuente became not just the second best, but eventually proceeded in terms of importance with regards to tools that we utilize, right? Now we have entered the age of metamodernism, right? And metamodernism has not forgotten all of the things that came before it, right? So we understand the candle, we understand the water, we also understand the elements and how they are incorporated onto our practices, right? We understand the syncretizations of the music and the spirits and the courts and all that good stuff, right? So all of that we did not get rid of, but as we move into the metamodern world, we now see that there are also other tools that we can utilize on our altars, in our spaces, and for our practices, right? So my best piece of advice for people who always ask, what are how can I set up my altar? How can I put a space together to do this type of work? And the answer will always be a candle, a glass of water, and your prayer books. And as we move through some of the other syncretizations, we're going to incorporate some of those other elements, such as the element of air, right? Because we already have fire, we already have water, okay? When we incorporate the element of air, which could be considered the prayer books, absolutely, but we do that more so with the incenses, right? With the burning of certain herbs, okay? And when we get to earth, this is where we start to see some more metamodern incorporations, things like crystals, certain rocks, certain sticks, certain metals, and things like that on the altar, right? Again, we are looking at a practice that is open and is absolutely a wonderful foundation for other forms of practices to be incorporated into it. So essentially, my loves, there is no wrong way of putting together your altar, but there is a way of understanding how you and the altar do the thing, right? And having tools on your space that help you to understand and to do the thing is important, but don't let it be the end all be all, right? Don't let it be a distraction. Because at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, you don't need an altar, you don't need a glass of water, you don't even need a freaking candle. You just need yourself, and you need your abilities, your faculties, your spiritual gifts. Okay? And you can do your mediumship, you can do your espiritista work anywhere, anytime, on command. But that takes time. And until then, we usually tell our students, we tell our mentees, we tell our godchildren, we tell people who are looking to us for information, we tell them to start small. Start with prayer, silence, and time, giving your time to that work. Because in order to give light, you must become light. Tell me, where's the lie? Tell me. You can't. This is how we grow.